Hi, my name is Benjamin,
And my name is Rasmus.
and we're going to talk about the topic From Great Society to Watergate, which is the period from 1960 to 1975.
This is our agenda. We're going to talk about the following topics: equality and the American dream, the presidents of the period, and music and counterculture.
First up, I'm going to talk about equality and the American dream. During the 1960s, a lot of movements either started or continued. It was during this time Martin Luther King held his very famous speech, I Have a Dream, inspiring people across the nation to take action in creating a more equal country, among everyone, not just for white people, but also for black people. His dream was for the American dream to continue living on. His speech inspired many people to take action, and thousands of people marched for civil rights. And a new national organization of women signaled a new beginning of women's rights and the demand for equality among genders. Protest against the Vietnam War began, and a new hippie culture arose.
Now we'll be moving on to the presidents of the period. We'll be starting out with John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy was born in 1917 in Massachusetts. He served in both the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate as a senator of Massachusetts before becoming the 35th president in 1961. In November 1963, John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. He was married to Jacqueline Kennedy. Together they had 3 children. In 1961, John F. Kennedy won a narrow victory over former Vice President Richard Nixon. He won mostly because he had Lyndon B. Johnson as his running mate, who won him Texas and most of the southern states. During his time as president, Kennedy did not manage to make a lot of domestic changes because of a mixed Congress, but he distinguished himself on the international political scene, where he managed to secure the nuclear test ban treaty and negotiated a deal with Russia about the Cuban Missile Crisis. Kennedy was a supporter of the civil rights movements, and one of the last bills he sent to Congress was a civil rights bill, which today is known as the Civil Rights Act. Because of the mixed Congress, Kennedy had a hard time pushing through economic reforms, but he did manage to push through some minor tax cuts. John F. Kennedy saw the Vietnam War as a necessity to make sure that Asia wouldn't turn into communist societies and therefore sent troops to South Vietnam. During his time as president, Kennedy did not manage to change a lot of things, but he became an important idol for many to look up to. One of the things he did manage to change was the civil rights situation, where he managed to pass the Civil Rights Act bill. In November 1963, John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas by Lee Harvey Oswald. The assassination caused a lot of controversy, and there were many conspiracy theories about who was behind the assassination. As many thought, Oswald did not act alone. Oswald was killed shortly after the assassination, so there was no way to get any answers. Lyndon B. Johnson, the 36th President of the United States, was born in 1908 in Texas. He was elected Vice President in 1961 and became the 36th President in 1963 after John F. Kennedy's assassination. Johnson died in Texas in 1973. Lyndon B. Johnson had the same political view as John F. Kennedy. After Kennedy's assassination, Johnson used the grief of the country to push through liberal legislation. He started the Medicare, Medicaid, and food stamp initiatives and passed the Voting Rights Act as part of his Great Society plans, in which he wanted to build a society without any poverty. Medicare and Medicaid assured health services for the elderly and the poor, and the food stamp initiative made sure everyone had something to eat, while the Voting Rights Act made sure that blacks could vote. Johnson also made a lot of other social service programs as a part of the Great Society plans. Lyndon B. Johnson pushed tax cuts through Congress, thus improving the economy, especially for the companies. Johnson had the same opinions on the Vietnam War as John F. Kennedy and saw it as a necessity. Lyndon B. Johnson affected the United States today a lot by passing several social service and civil rights bills, thus furthering equality and improving civil rights.
Richard Nixon was born in 1913 in California. He was a Republican congressman who served as vice president under Dwight D. Eisenhower. Nixon then got elected in 1969 but became the first president ever to resign in 1974. His wife was called Pat Nixon, and together they had 2 kids. Nixon responded to the public opinion polls, but only when it came to domestic affairs. He used the moon landing of Apollo 11 to demonstrate the greatness of America, but at the same time had prepared a speech in case the moon landing would have failed, claiming as if it was the entire world's loss. As the Vietnam War continued to reign on, he tried a new plan to end it, the so-called Vietnamization, which consisted of training and gearing up the Vietnamese soldiers. At a later point, he tried to frighten the northern Vietnamese by demonstrating his willingness to bomb urban areas. It really didn't help at all, and almost 1/3 of the American soldiers had died while Nixon was the president. But this wasn't the only war mistake Nixon had taken. He started supporting Israel in the Middle East, which led to the Arab states curtailing the oil production. Nixon wasn't very popular at this point, but that unpopularity soon turned into hate. It turned out that he had sponsored the burglary of the Democratic Party's campaign headquarters, engaged in lies and payoffs, and used illegal campaign tactics during the election in 1972. All of this was found out because of his own documentary. He wanted to provide a permanent historical record of his success, but all it really did was showing all of his insane and preposterous plans. At this point, he decided to resign as the president, and since his vice president already had been forced to resign for other illegal activities, for the first time in American history, both a new president and a vice president had to be appointed. These two became Gerald Ford and Nelson Rockefeller. One of the first acts of the newly appointed president was to pardon Nixon, so he therefore never stood trial for his actions. He was the only pardoned Watergate conspirator, meaning that the rest of the participants had to go to prison. At this point, the United States citizens was put into despair, but it also pushed the citizens into a more personalized viewpoint, and it pushed them to continue their civil rights movement. Music played a big part in the history of the 1960s. Along with music, a new counterculture began, with the rising of the hippie culture. It was a fight against the mainstream society and creating a peaceful message. The new hippie culture was very much against the war and expressed this in protest and slogans such as "Make love, not war." The hippies dressed in a new style, with long hair, asexual clothes, hats, glasses and so forth, all of which completely broke the usual dress code. The music started being more than just music and became sort of a statement. Lyrics started to break what have been unbroken boundaries before. As well as being a statement, it also became more rebellious, with the rock genre growing bigger and bigger. A lot of big bands also started performing at this time, such as the Beatles and solo artist Jimi Hendrix.